Joel looks different in The Last of Us Part 1. It took me a while to spot the difference, but once I did, it was hard to unsee. There is a pain in his eyes. His clothes and features are the same, but there's a quiet, unmistakable torment imprinted on his face. I've played The Last of Us nearly a dozen times across PS3 and PS4, and I've never seen this side of Joel before. I know Joel has a troubled past because The Last of Us Part 1 goes out of its way to show me a traumatic death in the opening scene, but that pain was never etched into his facial features this clearly.
Ellie? You are treading on some mighty thin ice here.
Now there's an argument to be made that The Last of Us Part 1 is too similar to the PS3 and PS4 version to be considered a remake, and part of me agrees with that sentiment. The story is identical, the level design is exactly the same, and the gameplay, apart from some quality of life improvements, is unchanged. On paper, if you've played The Last of Us and remember it well, there's little reason to return to it on PlayStation 5. But The Last of Us Part 1 is more than the sum of its parts. It's an unrelenting tour de force that strategically leverages the power of the PlayStation 5 to push its story and themes a little further. Slight though they may be, all these enhancements serve the story, and the story is just as good as it was 9 years ago. The most obvious way The Last of Us Part 1 does this is with its visuals. The overhauled lighting, sharp textures, and smoother animations make The Last of Us a prettier game, but it's the details in the faces and characters that make it a more meaningful one. These details may not alter the way you think about these characters, but they certainly add more depth to them. What does recontextualize the characters is the existence of The Last of Us Part 2. Joel's actions are harder to stomach knowing his eventual consequences, and Ellie's bloody quest for revenge makes her character arc in Part 1 all the more tragic. Even if you don't like the direction the narrative took in Part 2, it makes the final moments of The Last of Us Part 1 even tougher to swallow. What's more interesting is that despite knowing how things would eventually shake out, I rarely question Joel's motives throughout the game, even in those final moments. It's a testament to Naughty Dog's superb storytelling and fantastic characters that despite knowing full well what Joel's actions entailed, I wanted to protect Ellie at all costs. All those complicated feelings The Last of Us left me with 9 years ago came back even stronger when I wrapped up Part 1.
Motherfucker! What's wrong with these guys?
Catch your breath. We're leaving.
The gameplay improvements, although subtle, are also done in service of the story. Aiming is more responsive, weapons have a satisfying heft to them, and Joel is a bit easier to maneuver. He's not as nimble as Ellie in Part 2, but a lot of the rough edges in the original have been smoothed out. This kind of stuff is to be expected in a remaster or remake, but in the case of The Last of Us Part 1, it removes another barrier from the experience. The tweaks to the combat and gameplay give Joel a more cohesive characterization on screen. It may seem like I'm reading a bit too much into it, but think of the times you've clumsily missed shots because of the way the aiming works. In a sense, it undermined a character that has been fighting to survive in a hellish post-apocalypse for 20 years. He shouldn't be whiffing shots in matters of life and death. With the tweaks, Joel is as ruthless as you'd expect from someone in his position and with his tragic history. The improved AI, meanwhile, brings with it a greater sense of peril, especially on the tougher difficulties. Enemies are more aggressive and employ advanced tactics. Some will pressure you from afar, while others will flank you if you aren't paying attention. Every now and then, an enemy will wait for you to approach and go for an ambush. The unpredictable AI makes for some harrowing firefights. Success demands a mixture of forethought, improvisation, and skill. It helps that companion AI is much better too. In the original, Ellie, Tess, and Bill would frequently end up in places they shouldn't be. They couldn't alert enemies, but it was always a bit jarring to see Ellie run in front of an infected while looking for cover. Occasionally in Part 1, a companion did get in my way in some tighter areas, but I haven't seen anyone carelessly wander into the fray in this new version. It's a small fix, but once again, it makes this world feel more authentic. Where The Last of Us Part 1 shows its age is in its level design. Just like the original 9 years ago, the game often relies on pallets, dumpsters, and ladders for its traversal puzzles. Part 1 takes place over the course of a year, and Joel never takes the time to teach Ellie to swim. This means that every time you encounter deep water, you need to find a conveniently placed pallet to ferry her across a small body of water. It was hard to overlook back then, but it's even harder to overlook now.
Alright, Eddie, I need you to...
I know. Step on the f***ing pallet.
Naughty Dog has gone through great pains to immerse the player in the world, and these simple puzzles don't fit the tone of the game. They are rote video game moments in an experience that doesn't need them. The combat arenas also feel a bit too enclosed and straightforward. There are some standouts like the docks at the beginning of the game or the bookstore in Philadelphia, but most of the encounters take place in linear corridors with waist-high objects used as cover. This lack of freedom limits your options in combat and makes it difficult to improvise when your back is to the wall. It's a shame because Joel's arsenal is varied and his craftable items can be fun to use. It's even harder to overlook given how impressive Part 2's level design was. The reason why combat felt so dynamic in Part 2 was because there was always room to improvise and multiple avenues of approach to support this. This is unmistakably one of those moments where the limited scope of the remake undermines the idea of creating a harmony between the first and second parts of The Last of Us's overall story. While the narrative and characterization certainly feels more cohesive now, the same can't always be said for how they play. However, fixating on gameplay discrepancies between both games diminishes The Last of Us Part 1's achievements. The brilliantly paced narrative is supported by some of the finest environmental storytelling in the business. So much of the world and its inhabitants can be extracted from the smallest details. A throwaway line between two hostile NPCs can shed light on other parts of the world, while a simple message scrawled across a wall hints at how the outbreak was handled 2 decades ago. The environments are rich with detail that add flavor to Joel and Ellie's adventure.
Military preparatory school.
Yeah, nice way of saying orphanage. I wonder what happened to all these kids.
Well, this place has been out for a good stretch. They ain't kids no more.
Meaning they're either hunters trying to kill us, or they're dead.
Or they got away.
But you don't believe that.
I believe in getting out of this city. Come on.
The most welcome addition to The Last of Us Part 1 is its impressive suite of accessibility features. Like The Last of Us Part 2, there are a wide range of visual, auditory, and difficulty settings that can significantly lower the bar to entry and make the experience more accommodating. You can customize subtitles, tweak screen shake, enable different vision modes, and retool the controls at any time to fit your needs. Even if you don't think you need any of these features, you might find something in there to make your experience a little smoother. I frequently played with high contrast mode enabled to help me track down smaller collectibles that I wouldn't normally be able to see. But for other players, these newly added options might make what was previously an unplayable game into a playable one. The most painful omission from this remake is Factions, the stellar PvP mode from the original game. The multiplayer mode had players choose a faction and build out a camp of survivors by running supply raids, which were matches that pitted you against the rival faction. Success would earn you resources to keep your compound afloat. Naughty Dog is working on an expanded standalone multiplayer component set in the world of The Last of Us and its sequel, but it's a shame the original Factions mode didn't make the cut. All these improvements taken by themselves may seem minor, but together they make one of the most memorable games of the PS3 era even better. In some ways, the two parts of The Last of Us are now better aligned, making transitioning between them much smoother. But in others, the years of progress in game design and development are all too apparent. But while some of the level design may not have aged all that well, the vivid cast of characters and remarkable story is more poignant than ever.
I'm sure your friend will be missing this tonight. Light on the reading, but it's got some interesting photos.
Now, Ellie, that ain't for kids.
Whoa! How the hell would he even walk around with that thing?
Get rid of
No,
that.
hold your horses. I want to see what all the fuss is about. Oh, why are these all stuck together? I'm just f***ing with you. Bye-bye, dude.